Morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you all here today. Thank you for inviting me to speak. The next 2 days, I think, promise to be a really... Oh, I don't know where my slides have gone. Great. Promise to be a really great, thorough exploration of the use of AI in financial services. And the timing really couldn't be better, as we're starting to see much more widespread adoption of AI globally across financial services. And we know that it's a sign when the regulators really start to take note of a technology that it's definitely going mainstream. And this week, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, in its latest newsletter, gave an update on its thinking about AI and machine learning and some of the risks that AI poses. Cyber risk, transparency and fairness, data governance challenges, and the ethical use of AI. Things are all no doubt familiar to you. But in financial services, we know that where there are risks, there are also huge numbers of opportunities. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today, the opportunities for the use of AI in RegTech and to help us meet our regulatory and compliance obligations. So, by way of introduction, I co-founded RegTech Associates with Jason Boud in 2017, shortly after I'd spent 4 years doing my doctoral research into how financial firms in the UK have dealt with a tsunami of regulatory change that followed the financial crisis. And it might not surprise you to learn that I uncovered a world of pain, huge amounts of data held in silos, manual processes, moving regulatory goalposts, and compliance officers really trying to do their very best in that situation. And stories, no doubt, that will be very familiar to you. As I emerged blinking into the light about 5 years ago today after my studies, I encountered this new breed of emerging technology solutions using innovative techniques, APIs, cloud, DLT, and AI that could be applied to solving many of those kind of intractable challenges that I uncovered during my research. So today, along with my esteemed colleagues and the team at RegTech Associates, we continue to actively research the RegTech market, developing deep insights, and more importantly, I think, getting to see hundreds and hundreds of products every year, many of which are using various types of artificial intelligence. So I just want to do a little bit of level setting, first of all, in terms of what we actually mean by RegTech. There are two definitions on the slide, one from our esteemed financial regulator, the FCA, and much as I hate to contradict them, I think RegTech is broader than just being a subset of fintech. And it has applications across many regulated industries, and our latest research, our latest vendor research, shows us that professional services, telecoms, healthcare, and energy are also actively using RegTech solutions. So we consider RegTech to quite simply be the use of technology to help regulated firms meet their regulatory obligations. RegTech is not, and possibly nor should it be, a disruptive force. It's an enabler. And as we know, disruption is not always so welcome in the world of risk management and compliance. The use of technology to manage regulatory obligations is not something new, and I think we need to be really clear about that. Those of you who are old enough to remember the introduction of Basel I, Basel II will know that that involved hugely complex technology challenges and implementations. But the label RegTech itself can be traced back to about 2015, following the emergence of a large number of startups after the financial crisis, who were actively using innovation to help meet the massive new regulations introduced post-crisis, Basel III, MiFID II, Dodd-Frank, and the list of acronyms goes on. Arguably, also, the pandemic has accelerated the need for RegTech, bringing with it new and unanticipated challenges, digital onboarding of customers, trader surveillance, all of which had to be done in a remote working world. And our research shows that the market has responded to all of these challenges over the last 5 years and is really growing, and we see a really bright future for the industry. We look at the industry through the lens of our taxonomy, and we've really created this focused on the types of regulatory problems that are being solved with these products. So we've got 11 separate categories, and I won't go through them all. You can see them there on the slide. Now, back in 2017, when we first started researching the market, we identified, I think, somewhere between 150 to 200 separate RegTech products. We're now at over 1,400, covering over 1,000 companies, 54 countries, across those 11 categories. And you can see, in terms of the distribution across the taxonomy, that by far the biggest is financial crime. That's about 33%, then followed by cyber, and then compliance management. And we estimate that about half of all the products that we've researched are using some type of either advanced statistical analytics or AI techniques. And I'll tell you about some of those use cases in a second. Before I do that, however, I thought it was worth giving you a flavour of some of the trends that we're seeing in the market so far this year and things that are building on trends that started last year. So first of all, we think there's going to be a continued high level of funding specifically into the financial crime and cyber segments of the market. And we've already seen some quite brilliant raises this year by Encompass, Silent 8 and Acumenor on the financial crime side, and funding for cyber has also dominated, with players such as Balbix, Axonius and Blue Voyant also raising. And we anticipate this buoyancy to continue, especially as cyber threats continue to evolve, and also the rise of the effectiveness agenda that's coming out of bodies such as the Financial Action Task Force and the Wolfsburg Group in terms of making a better job of fighting financial crime. We're also seeing what we're calling a convergence of regulatory topics. Typically, regulation and different risks have been managed in silos, but more and more these silos of risks are overlapping. So we're seeing convergence around third-party risk, fraud and cyber financial crime and fraud, all of which makes it very difficult then to manage those risks in those silos. And tax strategies are also coming under scrutiny as a result of the growth in the public knowledge around tax evasion through the Pandora Papers and those other leaks. And we're also seeing some interesting developments in terms of the G in ESG, where, you know, when scoring governance capabilities of corporates, people are taking into consideration the ethics around data privacy and data protection. So those are some of the trends we're seeing in that convergence. And then we think there'll be a consolidation, further consolidation in the RegTech market. We've already seen the acquisition of players like Passport and Company by Moody's Analytics, and also mergers. So Trulio and HelloFlow merged recently, a really great example of two vendors with very complementary technologies. So that snapshot of the supplier side of the market shows a really healthy market, huge amounts of capability and choice. And then if we think about the demand side, who's buying this technology, particularly in financial services? We know from our research and talking to, you know, our clients and their customers that regulated firms are at very different stages in their level of adoption of regulatory technology. And probably rightly so, because your RegTech strategy has to fit with your business size, your product set, your digital maturity, and the risk appetite, actually, for adopting new solutions. So we've mapped out what we think these 4 stages in the adoption are. The first is simply being compliant. You're doing what you need to do, and you're coping. The second is about efficiency. You're doing what you need to do, you're coping, and you're doing it faster. The third is effective. So you're doing what you need to do, you're doing it faster, and you're doing it better with better outcomes. And then the fourth is predictive. So you're doing what you need to do, you're doing it faster, you're doing it better, and you're finding out more. You're finding things in the data which enable you to take action earlier, to anticipate what might be coming around the corner. So returning to the use of AI, we think those at earlier stages will either not be using AI at all or be using simpler techniques such as robotic process automation. To be more effective, we start seeing the use of AI to improve speed and accuracy across large data sets. And this is likely to be probably through the use of things like supervised machine learning, some NLP potentially, also to improve outcomes and add to the efficiency benefits. And at the predictive stage, more complex techniques, perhaps unsupervised learning, perhaps deep learning, perhaps AI techniques that I know nothing about, that are new and cutting edge. And these are really trying to kind of spot those anomalies in the data and identify new and emerging patterns or risks. So what makes a good use case for AI in RegTech? Earlier this week, I was talking to a chief data scientist in a technology vendor, and she said something that's really stuck with me, which is that AI is not magic, and it can't solve every problem, and neither can it be expected to. However, there are some problems that AI is really, really, really good at solving, and I've tried to distill these down into 3 ingredients, which either singly or perhaps in combination are ripe for AI intervention. The first is where there are just huge structured data sets that are beyond human scale to understand holistically. They might be transactions, customers, call signaling data, or communications data. The second is where you're dealing with large volumes and disparate sources of volumes of unstructured data, text, PDFs, Word documents, emails, images. And the third is where there are kind of multiple repeatable binary decisions within processes, and these obviously lend themselves well to automation. And luckily, many different types of regulatory obligations often involve large data sets of structured, unstructured data, and lots of repetitive tasks. My research showed me that the biggest competitor to all of our clients is Excel. Everything's still being done manually. So looking at our first use case, this is fraud detection. Huge volumes of transactional or payment data needs to be investigated to identify suspected fraud. And fraud is a really big problem in the UK economy, with I think something like £740 million being lost to fraud in 2020. Traditionally, fraud detection has been performed using rules, binary rules that are hard-coded into the system, really inflexible and really easy for criminals to get to know and evade and find new ways of committing their crimes. So machine learning is a prime candidate for improving both the efficiency and the effectiveness of fraud detection. Supervised learning models can be trained on vast historic data sets to learn the patterns and trends used by fraudsters, and then this learning can be used to predict whether a transaction is potentially fraudulent. Using AI in this way drastically reduces the level of false positives and false alerts that are flagged using the rules-based systems, enabling human efficiencies, reducing the amount of human intervention, and releasing those resources to focus on higher value and tasks that involve more human judgment. Accuracy is also improved, and if you're a large bank and you're losing a lot to fraud, you want to be accurate in pinpointing where that fraud is happening to prevent those losses. And also, you're less likely to be stopping transactions that are not fraudulent, therefore removing friction from customer relationships. We've all been there where we've had a call or not been able to use our card and it's been frozen unnecessarily. And there's some great companies with superb technology in this space. A second area of compliance where there are multiple disparate data sets comprising structured and unstructured data, fulfilling some of those 3 ingredients, is the world of conduct risk. And this is a world where trading activity and communications between traders has to be monitored and surveilled to identify suspicious behavior, which could be indicative of insider dealing, other types of market manipulation, or even investor exploitation. And here we see some fantastic products making use of multiple AI techniques, usually natural language processing and machine learning, extracting relevant data from various disparate data sets, pulling it together, and then running machine learning models across that to identify patterns which may be suspicious. Obviously, this enables you to be compliant. You can more easily identify those bad actors amongst the noise where there's a much weaker signal. Costs and risks are significantly reduced, and viewing the data holistically in this way can drive out insights to improve trading performance. And the final use case is one that's very close to my heart, regulation and compliance management. With over 200 new regulatory alerts a day, the more effective management of regulatory change is really important. It's also a real challenge to understand how those changes might be impacting you and your organisation, and how those new regulations then map to your existing inventory of obligations. So this is where techniques like NLP really come into their own. They identify and extract regulatory changes from the PDFs or Word documents issued by regulators, classify them according to taxonomies, and then map them into your existing policies and controls. So through this automation, firms can get comfort that they are compliant, that they don't miss anything. This can be done more quickly and efficiently, making those spreadsheets redundant. And using AI in this way can also bring a more holistic view of the entire regulation and compliance landscape within an organisation, allowing the prioritisation of investment to where it's really needed. There are many other areas of regulation and compliance where we're seeing products using AI to deliver value, including anti-money laundering, transaction monitoring, know your customer checks, stress testing, digital conduct risk. The list goes on, and I would be here all day telling you about all of those use cases. So what might we see in the future? So, as you've probably guessed, I'm not a data scientist and I'm not an AI expert, but I am aware of some really exciting things that are on the horizon, making use of techniques like deep learning and federated machine learning. The next step for financial crimes management and fraud detection might well be deep learning. This allows models to self-tune, and they're likely to be deployed more and more, but that has to be balanced against issues with the explainability of those models, and that will have to be handled very carefully with regulators. We're also really hopeful that combining deep learning with NLP will actually allow machines to make more intelligent versions of regulations, so we can really understand what it is that they're trying to say. At the moment, lawyers and people are having to translate regulation into plain English to really understand what those obligations are. And another really exciting avenue for exploration is federated machine learning, where algorithms are developed and can travel and can learn over distributed data sets. This lends itself really, really well to better identification of patterns across multiple organizations, particularly when you're trying to fight something like financial crime, which is a network. I think there is a saying that it takes a network to fight a network, to defeat a network, and that's certainly where federated machine learning could come in handy. So there's some really exciting potential new use cases for different techniques of AI. But I'm going to bring you back down to earth with a bump, because it's really important to understand that there are some fundamentals we need to get right before we can implement those more advanced techniques. And this slide shows the results of some research by the AI Forum and Quantexa. They asked, I think, about 680 financial institutions what the biggest challenges were in their use of AI. And over a third of respondents cited data, either their data readiness or their ability to integrate internal and external data sources. We all know that data is the foundation of artificial intelligence, and without good, clean, well-understood data with clear governance and management, it's really hard to deliver on the promise of AI. Now, I know I'm not saying anything new here, and I'm probably saying something that you've heard in every single conference that you've been to on AI, but I think, institutions are still on that journey in terms of getting their data ready. But as they say, you don't have to eat the elephant all at once. And some of the most successful implementations we've seen are those that start on a small scale, aiming to deliver benefits in increment, and where RegTech vendors and institutions have truly worked in partnership to help co-develop some of that technology. I'm sure there'll be other speakers over the course of the next 2 days who are more well-versed in the intricacies and technical details of AI than me, and who will also tell you some stories of those successful implementations. I'm really looking forward to learning more, and welcome to take any questions